Alana, what do you say? Should we kick off? Or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've got 25 people in the room now. Perhaps some other people will join us, but it's a great turnout already, and hopefully we get joined by a few others in the coming minutes. But obviously today we're here to discuss a topic that I guess you could say is close to many of our hearts right now, which is the possibility and challenges when travelling to and from Australia. So I'll kick off, and I think I can start by saying that we could all agree that 2020 has definitely thrown us a few curveballs. I don't think this could be further from the truth when it comes to the travel and tourism industry. So today we're joined by some fantastic speakers who are going to give us some great insight into how the pandemic has affected the travel and tourism industry, and also share some of their predictions on the future. So we're very much looking forward to that. But before we get started, I'll just set the expectations and just briefly touch on the format for today. So we'll start off just by introducing the speakers, and then we'll hear a presentation from each of them where they will share their own personal insights. And then we plan to open up the floor to everybody here. So everyone here, it's an interactive seminar at the end when we have the question and answer section. So then we will invite all of you to interact and ask any questions you may have as well. So first up today, we're going to hear from Bjorn Ekegren, who is the country manager for Sweden and Finland at Emirates. So Bjorn has over 30 years experience in the aviation industry, and for the past 7 he's been at Emirates, where he's successfully been building up the airlines business here in the Nordics. Bjorn is somewhat responsible for establishing the direct line between Stockholm and Dubai, which then connects to the Emirates global network of over 160 destinations. Of those, there are Australian destinations, of course, with flights into Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, and also Adelaide. So in essence, Bjorn, I think we can thank you personally for helping us get home since you started at Emirates since 2013. And clearly your efforts have continued even this year during 2020. Second on the agenda, we're very honoured to hear from the Australian Ambassador to Sweden, Mr. Bernard Philip. Thank you very much for joining us today. You have been at the Australian Embassy here in Stockholm for almost 1.5 years. And I know this year in particular, you've been investing quite a bit of energy into the travel sector, working alongside other industry experts, such as Bjorn at Emirates, for example, to really overcome all the challenges and disruptions that the pandemic has caused, including like the border closures and travel restrictions. So as we understand it, your work has been really vital in not only safeguarding the travel and tourism industry, but also protecting our freedom to travel. So we can't wait to hear from your presentation shortly about all the fantastic work that you've been doing. Lastly, but absolutely not least, we're very proud to be joined by Sally Cope, who is actually dialing in from a different time zone this afternoon. So she joins us from London, and Sally is also an extremely experienced professional when it comes to the travel and tourism industry. For the past 30 plus years, she's been working with travel agencies, tour companies, hotels and resorts. And now she holds the post as Regional General Manager for the UK, Ireland and Northern Europe for Tourism Australia. So Sally, a very warm welcome to you as well. Before I get started, I know everyone's very excited to hear from these speakers. We have a fantastic panel, but I would firstly just like to introduce Mr. Warren Campbell, who is the chairman here at the Australian Business Council of Sweden. So he's just going to give a brief introduction about who we are here at the ABCS, as we're known. So I'll hand it over to you, Warren.
Thank you very much, Alana, and welcome everyone this afternoon, those of you in Sweden, to a dark December afternoon. So it's going to be a pleasure to talk about this topic. I'll keep this very brief because many of you know us already, and I don't want to stand between you and our interesting discussion here. What I did just want to do was a very quick plug for the Australian Business Council. So we're a membership-based association, individuals and organizations, and I would say the common theme that brings us together is an interest in the business intersection between Sweden and Australia. The Australian Business Council in Sweden, as opposed to potentially some other chambers of commerce and business councils in the Australian expat network, is not so much about trade from Australia into kind of importing countries. this is much more a relationship between Sweden and Australia that is built on kind of common interests in areas like health and education and innovation and tech. So it's much more of a, I would say, two-way community. And our aim is basically to provide a forum for our members to build a pipeline between Australia and Sweden around these topics. We do this through events. 2020 for us, like for a lot of other event and networking driven organizations, has clearly been disruptive, but not actually only in a negative way, I would say. It's actually provided an opportunity for us to bridge the tyranny of distance, as we as Australians often talk about, in the sense that through virtual events, we can connect with Australia frequently, with people in different parts of Europe and all around Sweden. And so this year we've introduced a couple of new collaborations. We've worked quite closely with the Swedish Australian Chamber of Commerce in Australia to do joint events. And we've also teamed up with AB, which is business councils in Europe out of Australia, and have been partnering with them in several events. And I think hopefully we have several of their members joining us today. This is a volunteer-based organization. We're built around membership and support from our individual and corporate members. Emirates has been a great corporate supporter to us. And I also need to flag that Bernard and the embassy have been very supportive of our efforts. So it's fantastic to see the two of you participating in this discussion today as well. Finally, we have several more, I think, quite interesting digital virtual events coming up in the coming months. So I think on the next page here and at the end, you'll see a link to our website where you can register for upcoming events and to become a member if you're interested. I'll leave my little sales pitch at that point. I think, as Alana said, this is an extremely topical discussion that we're going to enter into today. Obviously, the thing that binds most of us in this meeting together is that we're on the far side of the world from a country where we'd like to spend time going forward, and seeing how the travel industry will develop coming out of the pandemic is of interest to all of us. So very much looking forward to hand it back to you, Alana, to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just before we get started, I just wanted to reiterate when it comes to our partnerships. And I'm very proud to announce today that today's webinar is indeed sponsored by Emirates. So Emirates have been corporate partners to the Australian Business Council of Sweden for the past 2 years. And it gives us a really fantastic opportunity to co-create events just like this today online, and hopefully in the future more in-person events too. So we look forward to that. And to you, Bjorn, and to Emirates, we just want to show our gratitude. We're very grateful to have you on board. So thank you so much. And with that said, I would like to hand the stage, or in this case, the camera, over to you.
Over to me. Then I'm on. I'm going to talk about 4 topics to start with today. First, a little bit about facts. Who is traveling to Australia today, or I would like to say to and from Australia and Sweden. I had a meeting with Alana in my office, and we started to talk about, is it safe to travel or is it safe to fly? So that's what the next topic is all about. We are in a special situation right now, where we have seen that meetings and so on has been driven by technology and development of technology. And the question is, how is this going to affect us in the future? And then another question is, what kind of impact will this COVID-19 have on business travelers and other segments, and especially the leisure segment? So that's the topic for today. Let's start with a quick recap on some facts that I got from Swedavia, the operator at Arlanda Airport. Looking at the traffic growth between Sweden and Australia, we can see actually that we have seen a growth by about 30% the past 5 years. That I think is rather impressive actually. When does people travel? Yeah, they travel in December, but there is also a small peak in July. Sydney and Melbourne, the largest destinations. After Sydney and Melbourne, we have Brisbane, but Sydney and Melbourne, the largest ones. It's a fairly even split between Swedes and Australians going between the two countries. So it's almost 50-50 actually. Looking at purpose of travel, 15% is traveling in business and the rest in leisure. There is a rather large portion when it comes to the cluster called visiting friends and relatives. What was interesting, what's actually a little bit new to me was the next part, the age group. Who is actually traveling? And here we can see that the largest group is the ones between age 20 to 34.
Because I'm trying to listen to this.
And also that there are more females traveling between the two countries than males, actually. Did you know that?
Sorry, Bjorn, I'm just going to interrupt for a second, just to ask anyone that's got their microphones on. I hear very cute kids in the background, but I'm very interested in what you have to say, Bjorn. And just FYI, if you wanted to show your screen, we can't see it. So I'm not sure if you wanted to present here.
You can't see my screen?
No, you need to share that with us.
I thought I did. Oh, that was a good start.
Fantastic. Now we can see as well as hear. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So on the left-hand side, we have the traffic growth development and increased by 30% the last 5 years. We can also see leisure segment being 85% of all the traffic. And then on the right-hand corner, we have the age split, where we could also see that the ones traveling mostly are the ones in the age of 20 to 34. More females traveling than males. How come? Yeah. Is it safe to travel today? Yes, I would like to say. There have been a lot of research on this topic, of course, during this period. And one of the reports that I think is rather interesting is the one from IATA. And what has been reported since beginning of 2020, there has only been 44 cases that has been reported that has caught the COVID-19 on board an aircraft. And that's one passenger among 27 million travelers. So that figure is actually rather small. There have been studies carried out by both Airbus and Boeing, and they're showing more or less the same thing actually. And what they have done is that they have compared the environment on board with other environments like the grocery store, office buildings, and others. And what they have found out, how it is to sit next to each other on an aircraft, is the same as having a social distance in another environment of about 1.8 to 2 meters. And why is that? Yes, because it is actually limited face-to-face interactions when you are traveling. Your face is forward. And the seat in front of you is actually acting as a natural shield as well. And then we come to something important here. The airflow in a cabin is coming from the ceiling to the floor. Air is exchanged 20 to 30 times per hour. Compare that to an office space where it's most likely 2 to 3 times per hour. HEPA filters, that is something that we are using and many other airlines. And it's the same type of filters that you're using at hospitals. And by looking at the efficiency rate when it comes to removal of bacteria and virus, it's 99.9%. Yes, I would like to say that it's rather safe to travel actually, or to fly. I'm not talking about the destination when you arrive later on. And on top of that, all airlines have introduced other measures as well. And Emirates is not the only one, but just to give you a few examples what we have done. You know, we have the comfort kit on board. Now we have also introduced hygiene kits. New safety protocols have been introduced. All the customers on board need to wear masks. Cleaning has been enhanced. A lot of measures have been introduced at Dubai Airport, as an example. And also for the customers to feel even more safe, we have also introduced our multi-risk travel insurance. So if something happens to you when you travel, this insurance will cover all the costs. There is something called the Safe Travel Barometer. You can check it up on Google actually, where you can see that Emirates is ranked among the top airlines when it comes to health and safety. And the same thing goes for Dubai Airport as such. Now we come to the speculating part. I have seen so many reports and heard so many stories how the traffic will develop in the future. So the question is today the future given the way social distancing has driven the use of technology? I would say yes and no. For sure, health and safety will be on top of our minds for a long time to come. There is this fear of flying, that it's not safe, but as I have mentioned, I believe it is rather safe to fly. The use of the technology that we are using today will bring down travel, but to say that it will affect all customer segments equally, I would say no. Business travel will go down and part of it will never come back. I believe strongly, and that's what we hear as well from travel managers and so on, that corporates will evaluate carefully the purpose of the meeting. Is there a need to travel? Can I handle an internal budget meeting with my colleagues in Australia on Zoom instead of traveling? Probably yes. But if you're going to business meeting and the purpose is to influence or build a relationship, I strongly believe that you need to meet face to face. And I have been living in Asia for many years. And the personal relationship was probably the most important part. And the only way to create that one was with face-to-face meetings. So people will travel. There will be business travel in the future, but maybe not to the same extent. Will short haul or long haul rebound differently? Yes, I believe short haul will rebound quicker. And that's what we saw in August when we saw here in Sweden as an example. We saw a drop in number of cases and people started to travel again, but they started to travel short haul. Short haul will have other challenges, of course, because here customers will look at other means of transportation in the future as well. But that's another aspect of it. That's the climate aspect. Then I believe by looking at destinations and so on, the impact will be different between destinations. Maldives, how many is going to the Maldives with purpose of travel of business? Not that many. And Maldives has already rebounded, actually. India, as an example, has a big share of business travelers. From Sweden, it's about 50%. Yes, we will see an effect when it comes to travel to India, where the business of purpose of travel is business. Airlines having a focus today on pure business traffic will have a challenge in the future. And I think that for the next coming years, you need to rethink your business models a little bit. Because you have to cater for the leisure traffic. But not only airlines, this is also for us about our distribution channel, the agents. Had a meeting with a couple of weeks ago with FCM, that is rather big in Australia, I would like to say. And in the Nordics, they are only focusing on the business traffic and mainly the SME segment. But they are planning to open up here in the Nordics as well for the leisure traffic, to start to sell that part. A rather interesting development, but they see the need for it as well. And then we should remember, and Bernard, you said it, we haven't seen the sun since 28th of November. Sweden is a cold and dark place, big part of the year. People need to travel. And when it comes to myself, I would like to feel the beach, not only see it via Zoom or Teams. I strongly believe a three-dimensional experience is much better than the two-dimensional experience. So we will travel. Thank you very much.
Bjorn, thank you so much. I do agree that we will travel again, and it's extremely reassuring to hear about all the safety measures that Emirates are taking. I think you guys should be very proud of yourself. It almost sounds like flying with Emirates is safer than going for fika in dark, cold Sweden. So thank you so much for your presentation. Very much appreciated. Without further ado, I would like to now pass over to the Australian Ambassador of Sweden, Mr. Bernard Phillip.
Thanks very much, Alana, and thanks to you and Warren and Richard and other ABCS colleagues for inviting us to participate today. It's also nice to join with Bjorn and Sally, and I'd like to sort of say at the outset how much we appreciate the support of the airlines, including Emirates, who have made such a great contribution to helping Australians get home back to Australia through this crisis, and also helping Australians and Swedes and other people from other countries come back to the Nordics as well, because some have had occasion to very much need to do so. I'd like to also mention that my colleague Tina Lawson, our Deputy Head of Mission, has joined us today. I was going to say this evening, but it's still only afternoon. Tina's been at the forefront and has really led on our consular response, which I'll touch on in a moment. First of all, I thought I'd quickly say a bit about the current situation in terms of Australia's travel and border restrictions. I think the first thing to say is that the border restrictions have now been in place since the 20th of March. So that's coming up to nine months, which is a pretty extended period. I think there's been a couple of different aspects of them, though, and it's sometimes useful to step back and sort of be clear what we're talking about. So it's a combination of foreign nationals not being able to enter into Australia unless they gain an exemption. There's then the strict quarantine arrangements upon arrival, in particular 14 days in a hotel or other designated accommodation. Since the large COVID wave that we had through the Australian winter, particularly in Melbourne, we've then had these flight caps in place. in order to ease the pressure on the quarantine arrangements. And they have started to open up somewhat, or the caps have increased, but they still are in place across each of the Australian ports. And there are finally still limits on the ability of Australians to depart Australia. So what it does all amount to is a pretty significant border restriction. And I think clearly not only the federal government, but also state and territory governments, whilst they've sought to balance interests, have very much been guided by health risks. And the result of that, it's pleasing to say we can see at the moment, which is that we've now gone 11 days in Australia without a locally transmitted case, which is the first time there's been no local transmission for an extended period since late February. So I think that has to be counted as a pretty remarkable achievement on the part of the Australian people as well as Australian governments in being able to reach that point. There still are some cases that exist in Australia. So for the last 2 weeks or so, we've had about 10 cases a day, so about sort of close to 70 per week. I think that does underscore the continuing health risks that are posed by travel and by people coming from higher risk environments. I think the two final points I'd mention about sort of the COVID situation, one is that we have had this travel bubble in place with New Zealand. So New Zealanders have been able to enter Australia now since October without the quarantine requirement. The New Zealand government has just announced that it will look to reciprocate in the first quarter of next year. So I think that's something very much for Australians to look forward to, but will hopefully offer some insights into sort of future travel arrangements and what's possible in this period. There has also been discussions around whether that bubble might be able to be extended to other low-risk destinations. Final point I'd mention just around the COVID-19 update is, well, what does the future bring? I think it probably pays to be pretty cautious in speculating because of the complex range of factors, but also because I think we've sort of perhaps got it wrong in the past, or it's been difficult to predict in the past. I mean, if you think back to the winter here in Sweden, we were all sort of talking about things opening up in the summer and certainly by the end of the year, and that's not quite the case now. So I think we've just got to be cautious. And certainly the message that's come from Australia consistently, I think, is that we don't expect to see the borders open up to places with high transmission rates for some time, unless there's a vaccine or another breakthrough in COVID-19 management. The good news there, of course, is that the vaccine situation does seem to be very promising. The second topic I thought I'd touch briefly on has to do with exemptions for business travellers in terms of the interest to this group. So essentially, the Australian Border Force Commissioner does have the ability to grant exemptions for foreign nationals to enter Australia for a number of purposes, particularly relating to our economic recovery. So first of all, if the foreign nationals have critical skills required to maintain the supply of essential goods and services across a range of different sectors. And second, if they are delivering services in sectors that are critical to our economic recovery, whether it's manufacturing or financing and a range of other sectors and roles. So this is something that individuals and business can apply for. And the message I sort of wanted to convey was that the embassy, our embassy, is available to support and facilitate and provide some advice around this. Without going into the details, I can say that we have been able to support a number of companies who've needed to get people into Australia, whether it's for project delivery or an investment to support Australia's economic recovery. So please do get in touch if you are seeking advice, or encourage others to get in touch with us. The third topic I thought I'd touch on briefly is our consular response. This has been one that I think it's fair to say is unique in Australia's history. We have worked to get Australians home in other situations, notably back in 2006 in Lebanon, a large number of Australians, particularly dual nationals, who needed to get out of Lebanon. But the scale and the global reach of this current response, I think, is unprecedented. So just to give you some of the macro statistics, so far through the crisis, our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has helped over 34,000 Australian citizens and PRs get home. That's been through 500 flights, including 78 that have been directly facilitated. We've had a global do not travel advisory in place for much of this last period. We've extended arrangements for emergency loans, including for flights. So it has been a very large effort on the part of our diplomatic network, including here in the Nordics. The situation we currently face is that despite that large number of Australians having returned through our support, we do have sort of over 45,000 Australians still registered to return, including nearly 40,000 who've expressed a desire to return home when they can. And so we're continuing to work with these Australians on the availability of flights, still fielding a large number of calls each week and each day, working with Australians to help them on their arrangements here in Sweden in terms of if they need to extend their stay or access particular services. I think what we recognise is that whilst there were many Australians who were able to return home in the first phase of the crisis, people's situations and circumstances do change, whether it's their family arrangements, employment, study, or family situation back home, or their mental and physical health. So again, our message is please do get in touch with the embassy and we can at least provide advice, hear what the situation is, and see if there's a way that we'll work with Emirates and other airlines in helping people get home. The final point I want to touch upon, and I'll be very brief on this, not least to leave the field for Sally, who's got some very homesick-inducing nice video footage that she will share. But it's just to say that the Australian government is obviously working very significantly to support those parts of the economy that have been impacted by the crisis. I mean, all of the economy has been, but I think there's been a particularly significant impact on the services trade part of the economy that does rely on international trade, and tourism is front and center there, as also is international education. So I think the sector has benefited from a range of economy-wide measures, including JobKeeper, but the government recognises that additional support has been required in a range of areas, and that is a very high priority. I will mention the international education sector as one which has been, I think, central to Australia's export growth in recent years and really made a huge contribution to our economy and social outcomes as a whole. Where we're at now is that the education ministers have met regularly between the states and territories and the federal government, and they're all coming up with plans to facilitate student arrivals back in Australia as soon as possible. There is a sort of an early arrangement underway whereby 63 students arrived in Darwin at the end of November. And so I think each of the states and territories are looking at what might be possible. Point at which to end on is just that, I mean, as we look beyond, hopefully at some point before too long, the crisis, I think there's a sense in which, for the reasons Bjorn set out, there will be some pent-up demand for international engagement and in-person engagement. I really would echo all the points that he's made around the need to meet in person for relationship building, for influencing, but also in the case of business for being able to make investment and business decisions. I mean, the ability to do so in some cases without that in-person element is restricted. And so hopefully we'll see a return to this. And in the case of Australia and Sweden and the Nordics more broadly, I think where hopefully we'll be in good shape is that those countries in many respects will have come through better than others because of the nature of their economies and their ability to innovate. And I think some of those core factors that have underlined our engagement with the Nordics, particularly the strong digital focus, the strong focus on innovation, and the only going to increase urgency for sustainability and climate response, I think they are going to hold Australia and the Nordics in good stead as we try and build our engagement. So thanks again to the Business Council. It's been great engaging with you guys over the past year, but even look to doing so more next year when we can do some of it in person.
Thank you so much, Bernard. And yes, very much looking for our next in-person meeting. I just want to say that I think that all the work that you and the embassy and Tina, everyone else there, it's extremely impressive. And obviously we're very grateful for the amount of work you've put in to get people home as seamlessly as possible. You did mention there briefly about the capping, and just on a personal note, I can mention that I was talking to my mother this morning on the phone, and in the background I could hear plane after plane coming into Tullamarine. So it was like music to my ears. So there's hope on the horizon. But I won't take up any more time. I would really like to hand this over to Sally Cope from Tourism Australia. So over to you, Sally.
Thank you very much, Alana. I too am going to share my screen. I've got some images here, not to make you homesick, but to inspire you to travel. Just make sure I've got the right. So can everybody see my screen? Yes, okay. So I'm really pleased just to have this opportunity to provide you all with a bit of an update on Australia's tourism industry. It's certainly been an extraordinary year. To get started, some of you may already know this, but I thought I'd just provide a snapshot into the actual size of the industry to Australia. It's always been, well, not always, but right now it has been very vital and crucial to Australia's economic prosperity. It's a key driver to the economic growth of the country, contributing 60.8 billion to the country's GDP. It supports 1 in 13 jobs across the country and is especially the lifeblood for many communities in regional Australia. 44 cents in every tourism dollar is spent in our regions. So these stats are all on the last, I guess, normal financial year we had, which was the year ending June 2019. And that year, 9.3 million international visitors entered Australia, contributing 45.4 billion to the economy. That, to put it in perspective, all of the international visitors combined with the domestic travel market is actually $126 billion in spend. So international arrivals represent 36% of the total. Right now, the industry is in the grips of the worst crisis it's ever faced. It is absolutely unprecedented. We started the year with the impacts of the drought and then last summer's bushfires really generating a lot of international media coverage, and that media coverage did gain momentum, get quite negative, and had a negative impact on visitors choosing to travel to Australia. So on the back of that, just as we were starting to put together a recovery strategy, then of course COVID-19 hit. In March, the World Health Organization declared it was a global pandemic, and the world pretty much stood still as international travel shut down. So the graphs around that time were pretty ugly. International arrivals decreased an unprecedented 95% during the second quarter of 2020. And that was following a drop of 28% in the first quarter. So we were on the back foot when the pandemic was declared. This massive drop reflects the widespread travel restrictions, particularly through March, April and May all over the world, where countries were trying to spread the limit the spread of the pandemic. Right now, I believe the current trends are showing a decline around 70%. for the entire year across the world. So there has been movement, and in Australia's case, I guess that's largely Australians repatriating. So in this extraordinary environment, we realised that we needed to have a clear framework on our approach to recovery, especially as things were consistently changing globally, and it's not a linear A to B style recovery. In some cases, it feels a little bit like one step forward, two steps back. So what we did at Tourism Australia, we're very much insights driven. We do a lot of research, qualitative and quantitative, to really inform all of our decision making. In this case, we developed a framework to define the stages of this crisis, and we call it our Green Light Project. And basically what we're doing is we're using several metrics that are current travel indicators that can tell us or help us to define where a market stands. So we look at things like the number of COVID case numbers in that country, the aviation outlook, the forward bookings data, and also consumer sentiment. And this allows us to measure at what stage of recovery that market's in, and therefore how we will talk to it as we're working through recovery. We've also identified we've got 3 key audiences to focus on. Consumers, of course. We need to maintain or grow consumer demand for Australia and find ways of converting that demand when it's possible. But then on the other hand, we also have to make sure that the Australian industry itself survives, and that's our tour operators, our hoteliers and so on, because they are the backbone to the Australian visitor experience. And then, of course, we need to focus on our sales channels in market and make sure they're not distracted by other destinations that may be opening up earlier. So what that means is we need to stay closely in touch with them throughout this whole process, even though the borders may be closed. So while we're waiting for the international borders to open, our team in Sydney have been focused on galvanising Australians to travel domestically. For example, we've just launched the Holiday Here This Year campaign with local talent, Hamish Blake and Zoe Foster-Blake, and they're urging Australians to support the country by holidaying at home this year. We've even got a new iteration of that at the moment, which is built around gifting travel as a Christmas gift this year. This is working. We know the domestic tourism market alone can't fill the vacuum of the lost international business, but already it's delivering billions of much needed revenue back into the industry, which is good news. From an international perspective, it's kind of a two-pronged approach. What do we do while the international borders are closed? And then how do we prepare for when they reopen? While the borders are closed, we really need to sustain the market and protect the investment we've already made in the market. So this means not going dark as a brand, and we refer to it as travel dreaming content. So just constantly feeding out news stories, social, digital, through media and so on, of just stories about travel to Australia to really prime travellers so it's top of mind when they are turning to plan and book their trips. And then when the international borders do open, then we can sort of move more into the recovery phase, work with partners and so on to work on converting sales. So I've got a couple of examples of both just to run through with you. First of all, the sustain strategy. As I say, we call this dreaming activity to keep people inspired. And I've just got a short video to start off with, which we actually released in April. So it was in the very early stages when the world was locking down. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
A funny thing happened on the way home as we closed our doors and explored smaller worlds. We looked out through the window and realised we missed you, maybe more than ever on toast. Now, that may not be true, but we'll tell you what is. Staying connected to mates. It's just what we do. So, look, there's the quokka, Ruse running amok, furry friends high in trees and green shoots popping up. The fish are on a break, From our sun-kissed bits, whale sharks roaming quietly, our silence, their bliss. What else is going on? Well, the winds are yet sweeter, the grass is getting greener, Uluru is having a rest. The stars are still twinkling, sun showers are sprinkling, the fruit is getting fat, the views are repainted, the horizon much lighter. There's plenty to like, there's plenty that's brighter. So that's news for now, stuff that makes you feel better. There's a lot more to share, to bring us closer than ever. With love from Oz.
I love that concept of with love from Oz. We've also done some more new style video content, which is 8D videos, and I encourage you to go onto australia.com to check them out. You need to watch them with headphones plugged in, and it gives a full surround sound immersive view of the Australian landscape. So that's some wonderful new content. We've been doing lots of work with australia.com, with all of our social and digital channels, pitching media to try and get as many good news stories as we can into various different media outlets around the world. We're also doing a lot of work with our stakeholders. Last month, we had a big virtual travel fair, which enabled 300 Australian industry to talk to their distribution partners here in market, just to keep those business relationships connected. That worked really well. We do lots of training of travel agents in market through our Aussie Specialist program, and lots of online updates and newsletters and so on. So just making sure, as I say, that we don't go dark. So when we get to the grow stage, this is where we can start really working on converting demand. And I really sincerely hope we do get as much notice as possible on borders reopening, so that we can be as effective or as quick as possible at turning this around. But who knows? I mean, the reason I say that is people from this part of the world particularly, they will plan and book their trip 6 to 12 months out. So it does mean that we can do quite a bit before the borders actually open. It'll be interesting to see what changes happen to the way people travel post-COVID-19. As already mentioned, at Tourism Australia, we really rely on research and insights to direct our strategy. And our marketing approach is always guided by the consumer research. For example, we're well aware, and the reason you'll see lots of Australian wildlife in our marketing is that the uniqueness of our geography is what makes us really special to international visitors. And in particular, the wildlife always tops the list in most markets for why Australia is considered so unique and appealing. Other things are food and drink always has high appeal, and this is one area where Australia tends to over-deliver on visitor expectations. Aquatic and coastal experiences always rank very highly as well. And of course, our people and our aspirational way of life are key drivers. Typically, our consumer research has told us, though, that for Australia, time, distance, and the associated costs of travelling there have always been barriers to travel from long-haul regions. So it's interesting because our latest research is showing that there's a little bit of a shift in thinking, and I think it's because of the year that everybody has had globally. Potentially, there's an opportunity for Australia, as the travel industry recovers. There'll of course be pent-up demand, but some of the drivers that are emerging around people's desire to rejuvenate, focusing on personal health and well-being, a desire to escape their current surroundings, and a yearning to reconnect with friends and family. So what we're thinking is that perhaps some of our key attributes, things like our wide open spaces, our relative isolation, and our reputation for being a safe and secure destination will be attractive draw cards for people wanting to get away. So what were once barriers, the time and the distance, may actually be a benefit in the long run. So I guess we watch this space for now. All I can say is that at Tourism Australia, we're doing our best to be prepared for the recovery period, And I thought I'd finish off with just one more recent video we've created, and it really taps into the appeal of the Australian way of life and some of those unique attributes.
Australia. Whoever came up with this place deserves a real pat on the back. I mean, think about it. There are birds who can laugh, mammals who can sing, waterfalls that can fall both ways, and 126 different shops that all reckon they sell the world's best pie. This is a place that took a look at the rule book and said, nah, here's a platypus. And you know the most incredible thing of all? While we wait for you, the best bits are only getting better. Imagine that.
And that is it from me. Thank you very much.
Sally, thank you so much. And I have to agree with Bernard, you've definitely made us all homesick, I'm sure. But in honesty, it's really great to see that the work that Tourism Australia hasn't stopped, even though we've got so many restrictions in place. I think you are succeeding in keeping the dream alive to Swedes that perhaps want to travel in the next semester, and also giving us Aussies something to appreciate when we're back on home turf. So thank you so much. We are a little bit over time now. There is a couple of minutes left, and we really did want to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions. So if you are quick enough and unmute your microphone, we're happy just to take a couple of questions before we need to, unfortunately, end for the day.
Oh, yes. Hi, it's Andrew Gillard speaking. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I work for Australian Airsail, which is one of the largest specialist travel agents here in Australia, in Scandinavia. A question kind of to everyone. When do you see conservatively that travellers, tourists, will be able to travel to Australia?
Is there anyone that can answer that? Perhaps Bernard, if I can direct it in your direction.
Look, Andrew, it's a great question. I really hesitate to even offer a prediction just because of the range of factors that I mentioned that make it so unpredictable. All I could really say is the message that we're getting from Australia, and there's such a huge incentive for Australia to open up as quickly as it possibly can. But that message is that there will, I think, need to be some kind of situation in place, particularly through a vaccine, that would make it significantly lower risk for Australia to open up. So again, we could offer sort of a prediction as to which, say, quarter of 2021 that might be. But I think it is just too difficult to offer anything reliable at this stage, unfortunately.
Right. That's understandable.
We'll keep our fingers crossed. Is there any other questions? We're happy to take one or two more if we've got time.
Yeah, hi. I've just got a quick sort of follow-up question to that. So obviously, just being an Aussie based in Sweden, I think like a lot of us, we're thinking, you know, when the next time we can go back and visit family is. But in terms of the whole rules surrounding the mandatory 2-week hotel quarantine, that's currently in place till when?
Well, that's in place indefinitely, as in at the moment, that's the arrangement that Australia has, including all of the states and territories. So again, there will have to be policy changes made by Australian governments before that shifts.
Okay, thank you. And very sadly, I'm going to close this meeting. We're already 1 minute over time, but I would like to thank everyone for your attendance and for the engagement during the question and answers. Particular thanks to our speakers, Bjorn Ekegren from Emirates, the Australian Ambassador to Sweden, Bernard Phillip, and Sally Cope from Tourism Australia. We really appreciate you being here. I think your presentations were very informative and extremely interesting. For everyone else in the room, if you are not a member of the ABCS, we do very much warmly welcome you and encourage you to join. You can find the application form on our website, which is australianbusiness.se. But from me and everyone else from the ABCS, we wish you a very pleasant evening. So thank you so much.